Hello, and welcome to this evening's event, in which we will be hearing from two incredible authors about their latest works and their amazing writing more generally. I'm Alison Flood, books editor of New Scientist, and I'm here to introduce Susanna Clarke, the author of two masterpieces of speculative fiction, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and Piranesi. The first, set in an alternative version of 19th century England, came out in 2004. Piranesi, which takes place in a mysterious and many-roomed house, won the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2021. Susanna now has a new treat for us, The Wood at Midwinter, set in the world of Jonathan Strange and following the eerie woodland adventures of a 19-year-old girl, Meredith Scott, who can talk to animals and trees. I'm also introducing Alan Moore, widely regarded as the best and most influential writer in the history of comics. His seminal works include From Hell, V for Vendetta, and The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. He's also the author of the best-selling novel Jerusalem, the short story collection Illuminations, and now The Great When, the first in the Long London Quintet, a fantasy series. It follows the adventures and travails of young and brilliantly named Dennis Knuckleyard, the hapless employee of a dreadful bookshop owner, Coffin Ada, as he inadvertently becomes the owner of a book that shouldn't exist and discovers the existence of another version of London, terrifying and technicolor. We are going to be chatting for about 45 minutes, and then I'll be asking Alan and Susanna some of your questions. So do send them in, and you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen rather than the chat if that's okay. So please join me in welcoming Susanna and Alan to the virtual stage. Here they come. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Lovely to see you. Guys, I've done a little description of each of your books, but I'm going to start by asking you both to tell us about them because I've only done it briefly and you'll do it so much better. Susanna, tell us about The Wood at Midwinter.
It's a short story which Victoria Sorden has beautifully illustrated. It's a story about a woman, young woman, who's been stuck in my head for years and years and years, who prefers woods and animals to people who she doesn't really understand and who don't really get her. So one day, one snowy day, she goes into the woods with two dogs and a pig. And because we need more pigs in fiction, I feel. And yeah, and it's just about what happens to her there.
It's really lovely. And you're right, I should have mentioned the illustrated too. They're gorgeous, the illustrations.
Yes.
Alan, can you sum up The Great When relatively briefly, or is that a bit of an ask?
Well, much like the 20th century itself, it's an appalling mess with far too many characters. But yeah, it's basically it's a story that's set in 1949 in a London that is physically and psychologically smashed. Um, and it details a young man's adventures in a kind of a parallel London that is actually more real than the London that we are familiar with. It's a kind of blazing archetypal London where it's all of London at once, past, present, and future. And it's filled with all sorts of unlikely entities. And yeah, the book details the protagonist's first encounter with this unusual London, which we will be continuing in the four subsequent volumes.
Excellent. It's a real wild ride. I absolutely loved it. Technicolor is a good way to describe it, I think. Susanna, what did you think of The Great When?
Um, I don't know what Alan will think of this, but I came up with a sort of description of it. I thought it was extraordinary, and it does what fantasy does best, which is show us things beyond our experience. A lot of fantasy just sort of shows us things which we've seen before, but this shows us something absolutely new. But I thought it's sort of the place where the late novels of William Burroughs, if anyone knows those, sort of Cities of the Red Knight, meet Ealing comedies. which is not an area which has been very well explored, I feel. It's
You
very
the focus
funny.
of the book, Alan, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great description. And Alan, what did you think of the wood at Midwinter, the wood at Midwinter, and how it kind of fits in
I
with
thought
Susanna's other work?
I thought that the wood at Midwinter was beautiful and lovely. It's it's the it's it's perhaps the original form of fantasy, or at least that's how it seemed to me. It seems like, I don't know, a mystery play or something like that, where it's got very few characters because it's a short story, and it's got, you know, one central scene with the wood in midwinter and this young woman sort of coming to an understanding about herself and her life and things like that. It seemed to be, with very simple elements and very simply told, talking about something bigger. And that's what I mean by the kind of the mystery play aspect of it. That it's sort of, I thought it was enchanting in the best sense of the word. You know,
Mm.
I thought that it really kind of got you to that, the atmosphere of stories told in midwinter, probably around a fireside, that sort of you will have to think about what they meant for a while. You know, they're a little Christmas present that will be gorgeous in its unpacking. You know,
Yeah.
I thought it was tremendous.
Thank you. Thank you. That's so
You're very
lovely.
well.
Um, yeah, they're both, I mean, mine is a short story. Alan has written a huge book that is details a place which is so beyond our everyday experience. And it's very difficult to describe something like that. I mean, at times I felt, just to throw something else in, at times I felt it almost verges on like the Beatles' Yellow Submarine. It's so surreal. Um, Butterflies turn into birds, turn into aeroplanes, turn into something else. I mean, it is extraordinary. Um, but at the beginning, I felt like it was almost horror. There were moments which felt like horror. But by the end, and I don't know what Alan will think about this, I felt it wasn't that the place was horror. A lot of horror is about a place where there is an intentional malevolence behind it. And there isn't here, I don't think. But it's just a chaotic, anarchic, it's London's subconscious with these arcana and strange things. But it strikes the people who go there as horrific because the human, they can't take it in. It's too, they can't deal with it. Therefore, it seems like horror. Alan, is that fair, do you think?
That is more than fair, and that is exactly that. That's it's deliberate. One of the things that I really wanted to do with this is my first series of fantasy novels. So I approached it the same way that I approach anything else. This is something I haven't done before. What do I want to do? What do I think about this? And what kind of take do I have on it? And one of the things that I thought was that a lot of modern fantasy, or at least some of it, um, seems to me to downplay the shock of the fantastic. That the children go through the back of the wardrobe door and it's really no big deal. Whereas I suspect that any normal children at their first sight of Mr. Tumnus would be screaming and vomiting and would spend the rest of their lives in therapy. It's like the fantastic, I think, should be at least in the kind of story that I'm writing, The Great When, which is a nominally realistic world, the realistic world of London in the 1940s, um, and the sudden shock of another world, that what it would be like to actually enter that world. I've even tried to. That's why whenever the characters go into the Great When, it suddenly shifts to the present tense, and it shifts to italics, and I've got the saline three little dots between the sentences to give that kind of sort of centripetal energy to it. But this is to make it a little bit much for the reader. It's way too much for the characters, and I want to make it a little bit too much for the readers, so that I also up the poetic writing during those bits, which is all to make. Yes, it's wonderful, but I wanted to make it overwhelming because I believe that the fantastic, if it was to intrude upon our lives, would be overwhelming. So I think that's a very, very fair comment. And I wanted it to be horror and kind of beautiful and funny and coarse. And I wanted it to be everything because life is. Uh, so yeah, and it's all crammed in together in real life. You know, real life, as I have a fridge magnet in the kitchen with me saying on, real life is not divided into genres. It all happens at once. You know, they're really, real life is a really badly kept bookshop shelf, you know, where it's all mixed in together. The ghost stories, the crime fiction, the comedies, the children's books, all in together.
Susanna, that question of like going through a door into a fantasy world, how people would actually react to it, is that something I feel like that's something you must have thought about a lot before, particularly with the likes of Piranesi, the sort of doorways between worlds kind of thing. I love Alan's way of putting it, that it wouldn't just be a sort of step through a wardrobe and oh yay, we're in another world. I think that's really interesting.
No, I think that my only portal fantasy, I think, is Jonathan Strange at Mr. Norrell. No, it's not. It's Piranesi. Sorry, is Piranesi. And as far as I remember, the point at which someone steps through, they do actually start screaming. So Alan and I seem to be agreed on that point. Although I would say that actually children might take it better. I can remember talking to a colleague of yours, I think, about the Narnia books, and she said that her small children, if animals started talking to them, they wouldn't be in the least surprised. It was sort of more or less what they expected. So I think a certain age, I don't know, Alan's got grandchildren, but I think a certain age children would cope with it. I think it's adults that can't cope with it,
Mm.
That's possibly
possibly.
true. That's possibly true. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Um,
like, yeah, in Piranesi, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, your characters end up in worse shape than mine do. You know, they completely lose their identity, sort of wandering around in these beautiful marble rooms.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I figured that this is something as I carry on with the second book, I'm having the characters starting to talk about what it's doing to them because they're starting to notice, and other people are starting to notice that they're a bit funny. Nothing that you can put your finger on, but there's something wrong with them, you know. But they don't see it in themselves because you wouldn't, would you? You
Yeah.
know. But
Susanna, can I ask
yeah,
how sorry, Alan, carry on.
no, no, please.
I was going to ask Susanna to tell us a bit about how the wood at Midwinter fits in, if indeed it does, to the Jonathan Strange world.
I don't want to say too much. I've put a little bit in the back of the book so that people who are curious. Um, but there was always this. in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, there was fairy behind the England. There was England. What I feel you need with fairy stories and fantasy stories is you need a sort of sense of depth. You can explain a certain amount, but then you need the wonder going back. So it's like a medieval painting. You need figures in the foreground, but then you need a sort of landscape that goes back into the misty distance. So in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, the misty distance was this sort of was the medieval period, but it was also fairy. And as the king in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, the Raven King, John Asclas, had a kingdom in fairy, then presumably that kept going after he left England. So I'm sort of hoping to turn my attention in that direction. And The Wood at Midwinter kind of slots in there to another. It says a different Newcastle. It's set near Newcastle, but not that one.
Well, dare I ask, does that mean that there's more to come then?
I hope so, yes. But I mean, Alan writes book after book after book, and he's a good author, and I'm a less good author. But I hope
Oh,
so.
no.
Well, we hope so too. It would be wonderful to go back into that world again. Alan, can you tell us a little bit about where things started with the world of Long London? What gave you this idea to plunge in?
Well, like with most books, I think that they're more a kind of a horrific car crash of ideas than a single idea. In my case, it was that I'd started to think about. I found that I was spending a lot of time thinking about very obscure, low-life characters from the late 20th century. I was thinking about these characters like Prince Monolulu and Ironfoot Jack Neave and Austin Spare and David Litvinoff. These are more for the second book, but the producer Joe Meek. These strange and often dark, sometimes comical stories um, that tend to be edited out of conventional history and social history. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to actually resurrect some of these people and make them live again in a fiction? And then I was sort of realizing that in order to fit characters like that in, it would have to be quite a stretchy fiction. It would have to sort of cover quite a lot of ground in terms of its style and mood, and so the the Great When gradually came into place around about the time when I read. I was looking through. I figured this will take place in London, so I was looking through my favourite London authors, and I got to Arthur Machen and got to his short story N, which is perhaps the best short story he ever did. And he's talking about this other world, the only evidence for which is this book which he'd invented called A London Walk by the Reverend Thomas Hampole. So I just thought, what if that actually turned up in a bookshop? This book that doesn't actually exist. What happens if it turns up in a second-hand bookshop somewhere? And luckily, I had the fortunate experience of waking up at 3 in the morning. I wasn't really waking up. I'd just been drifting off to sleep. I was in that flow of hypnagogic rubbish that we all kind of have to wade through before we're
And
unconscious.
meant to be our most
And
creative time, I think.
and yeah, I found myself sitting up bolt upright in bed because I'd had the thought, and then Dennis Knuckleyard, and that woke me up laughing. I just never heard such a ridiculous name in my life, but it seemed strangely memorable. So I wrote it. This is the only time that this has ever happened to me. I know lots of people say, "Oh, I get a lot of inspiration from dreams." I don't really. That is the only time it's happened. And as if to prove this, just a few days ago, I had another thing that woke me up. a phrase in my head, which was in an Australian accent and was saying, with scorpions, usually you keep them in the toilet. Now, I am not going to get a fantasy quintet out of that, am I? You
Well,
know, so
I
this
wouldn't
this
say
was very
never.
much a one-off occurrence.
You take it, Susanna. You take it and run with it.
No, I was when I read The Great Wen, I was looking when every time I came to a character's name, I thought, I bet this is a real person. So I'd look them up in Wikipedia, and there was very few characters that aren't in Wikipedia. You can find out all about them. But I told my husband this, and he said, "Are you sure that Alan didn't just write a novel and then put all his characters into Wikipedia?" But I said, I'm fairly certain he didn't do that.
I'm so busted. Um, I, I was there was I had a really really nice thing happen lately. I got because I'm on the second book now. I'm nearly at the end of it. I think I'm on the last 5 pages, but it's dealt a lot with Joe Meek, the record producer from the 1960s, and I got this letter a few weeks ago through the door from a woman who's living on the Eastern District Estates in Northampton, where I used to live. And she was saying that she was the widow of Robbie Duke, who was formerly known as Patrick Pink, who was Joe Meek's studio assistant and the last person to see Joe Meek alive. Um, and I'm because I'm still finishing the novel. I'm not really getting much chance to write to people, but I'm in a sort of a correspondence with this woman, and yeah, she was telling me that she'd really loved The Great Wen, and that she'd had to look up characters online to see if they were real or not. Or she'd looked characters up to think, I wonder what people on the internet are saying about this great fictional character that Alan Moore's invented. And then she'd find, oh, he didn't invent it. He stole it from a real person. But she said she was looking up Prince Monolulu and found herself watching a clip from 1957 of Prince Monolulu talking to Groucho Marx on You Bet Your Life. I didn't know about that. I'd have worked it in otherwise, but yeah, these, I think that actually fictional characters can surprise you, but real characters, I think, can sometimes surprise you more.
Yeah,
Goodness.
You know.
yeah.
Can we talk a bit about magic? How you both write about magic, how you come up with something that convinces people, like where you start from. Susanna, tell us about how you did that in the world of Jonathan Strange.
Um, I think you ground it a lot with a lot of at least for Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, that was certainly what I did. There was a lot of historical detail in that book to kind of make the world feel fairly familiar to anybody who'd read a Regency or a 19th century novel. So that when the magic came in, it felt like just another element. But that's how you make it feel reasonable that there are such people as magicians. But then you also want to build up an atmosphere or a kind of, it might be a transcendence, it might be a feeling that there's something beyond the fields that we know. And for that, you're trying to plug into the feeling that most people have had, or they've been on the brink of that feeling. And you're trying to remember how it felt to you and the sorts of apprehensions that you almost half had. So it's for me, it was very much in that book, it was very much grounded in the English landscape. And then things that seemed significant in the English landscape, but ordinary things, that feel as if they have a significance. So I mean, you kind of look to people like Alan Garner, but also the poetry of Ted Hughes and things, the sort of significance of ordinary things in nature that feel like they've got lots of things have a life that humans don't take any notice of. And if you can kind of draw that out or hint at that, at something going back, I think that's very important.
It's very powerful, I think.
Yeah. And then for fairy, you sort of begin to hint at the kind of thing that Alan is doing with Long London. It's a place that isn't particularly hospitable to humans, that doesn't quite make sense to humans, I think, something like that. So I think there's a variety of different things that you need to do. But for me, mostly it would be atmosphere, I think, and this hint of something beyond everyday life. Because I think that's not only something which is real, which Alan and I are both trying to get to, because we actually think there is something beyond everyday life. But also it's something I think that people long for, to be told that there is, that the mundane is not all there is, that we are not sort of stuck here in a shallow materialism. I don't know if Alan would agree.
I think very much. I mean, like with the whole basis of the Great Wen and the Long London Quintet is that, in a way, I kind of feel that this is all true. Yes, it is all a ridiculous, outrageous fantasy that I've made up, but I genuinely believe that the world of ideas and the world of the imagination is a real thing. It's a real world. And also, I believe that it is transparently the world that this physical world is standing upon. It is the foundation of everything around us. The chairs we're sitting in, the clothes we're wearing, the language we're speaking in, the whole world. This has all originated in the human imagination. We have unpacked the human imagination, and then we're sitting like people in a new house, surrounded by the cardboard boxes that we've unpacked it from. This is modern culture. I mean, with regard to magic specifically, I've tried with the Long London books not to resort too much to what I know about magic as it is practiced in this world. That's the subject of another book. I didn't want to fall back too much upon, I don't know, demons' names from the Clavicle of Solomon or angels' names or things that I wanted to make it all up. I wanted to come up with just creatures that people hadn't thought of before, rather than resorting to, I don't know, unicorns or dragons or whatever. I wanted to come up with popes of blades and all of the other strange things that are in Long London. That I wanted to almost suggest that, I mean, there are real magicians that turn up in the book. There is a picnic in a garden in Hastings in the opening pages that is between Aleister Crowley and Dion Fortune. It really happened. I don't know if the dialogue went like that, but sort of, and they had both separately had episodes involving threatening supernatural cats, which I thought, well, there's something there that I can use. And of course, we've got Austin Spare turning up later as a major character. But what I wanted to suggest was that the real magicians are a bit out of their depth in the Great Wen, because it doesn't actually conform to traditional ideas about magic. It's not Kabbalistic, it's not Enochian, it's this is something other, which was the main thing that I wanted to try and get across. But you can, I don't think it's difficult to conjure a magical atmosphere because, as Susanna says, people want that. And in a sense, I think that most people actually sense in some way that they have that. But we are living under science is one of the most beautiful and useful tools that we have ever developed for examining the material world around us. But we have another world that we live in, which is inside us, which is the world of our consciousness. And I don't think that that is the province of science. I think that that is the province of art and possibly spirituality, that inner world. Um, I think that they are both fields that sort of are unique in their own right, and very useful. But I think most people have a sense that even if we are told that the consciousness that we feel we have is an illusion, is just some sort of quirk of our various glands or whatever, that there is no real consciousness there, because I don't think doesn't conform with our general experience. I
Can I,
think that, sorry, please.
sorry, I just wanted to ask you a question because you've created this incredible place, Long London, which is so extraordinary and full of these, as I say, these arcana, these surreal images, these very, very powerful images. And it is a sort of fairy, a sort of
Mhm.
slightly horrific fairy, but it is a sort of fairy. But it seems to me you also make this story to pull the reader through. It's not just strange psychedelic imagery. There is this plot that pulls us through, and the dialogue and the writing is very funny and wonderful. But I think the plot, the story, the narrative, in a way, has to stay in this world, the mundane world. If you if you try and put a narrative into fairy, you have to make fairy more like this world, or the narrative won't
Yes,
work. Does that make
yeah,
sense to you?
that does. And I mean, like, it's something that I'm very aware of because I mean, one of the things that I'm trying to do over the course of these 5 books is, firstly, I want, because they're set at roughly 10-year intervals. First one's 1949, the one I'm writing now, 1959, 1969, 1979, and then a 20-year gap before the last one, which is 1999. So I want to talk about the material world in the last 50 years of the 20th century. Um, and I also want to talk about the immaterial world of Long London and how that has moved, and the changes in that and the interdependency of these two places. So, although Susanna's right, you can't have the narrative entirely set in Long London. It's a place it will spur on the narrative, but if it was all set in the Great Wen, um, the Great Wen would have to be a different place. It would have to have. I've said that the Great Wen, it doesn't exist upon the laws of logic so much as it exists upon the laws of poetry.
Mm.
That sort of that is how reality hangs together in the Great Wen. Um, Nevertheless, the in the 5 books, the fate of both cities is closely intertwined. And in the fifth book, which is more or less set on Millennium Eve, or at least on the brink of the new millennium, um, that is when there will there will come a crunch for both realities. Um, so, in talking about the past, about the last 50 years of the 20th century, I really want to talk about the first 24 years of this one. I want to talk about how we got here, the things that led up to this ridiculous situation that we're in at the moment, um, and to sort of and to talk about the real world by talking about this archetypal, platonic, blazing realm of the imagination. It's sort of authors, we're never really straightforward with things. If we're talking about the far future, we're talking about today. If we're talking about the past, we're talking about today. It's I mean, and also, yeah, there should be more pigs in literature, Susanna. I
Yes.
was thinking
Okay.
about I hadn't read many good pigs in literature since Animal Farm. That was terrific. It's sort of, but those were kind of evil pigs. So it was good to see a sort of a
Lovely pig.
contented and happy pig
Yes.
like Apple.
Yes.
A lovely pig.
A
Yes.
lovely pig. I did like your line, your Orwell line, though, Alan. Thanks to George Orwell for my brilliant opening sentence, as as you wrote in.
Well, I think I can claim that, yes, my book, The Great When, by Alan Moore, published now by Bloomsbury, does have one of the very best
Greatest
opening
of all
lines in
time.
all literature. Um, it is George Orwell's, it's not mine, but I think I do
It's in your book.
deserve some credit for stealing it with such
Yes.
panache.
We're going to soon come on to reader questions, but I had another one of my own. I feel like we should set all of our listeners an essay now, like compare and contrast the fairy worlds of Alan Moore and Susanna Clarke. I hadn't really thought about the fact that both of you have this kind of peeling back into and glimpse into other worlds than these. I love it in The Great When, Alan, when Dennis is going around London. At one point, someone sort of pulls it back, doesn't he? And you sort of peek into the crazy world of the Great When. I thought that was really lovely. But yeah, I wanted to ask you about magicians, and the way that you both write magicians is so interesting because they're such human kind of failing magicians. They're not like, well, I guess they are Oz the Great and Powerful in a way, aren't they? In that they've all got their human failings, like Piranesi or Jonathan Strange or Mr. Spare as well. Why are you both drawn to exploring this side of magicians? Why are they not great and powerful in truth?
I think our magicians are slightly different. Mine are very literary. They have a literary background, and Alan's have a sort of more real life background. But I think I loved it when Alan said the magicians in The Great When are out of their depth. I think all magicians are always out
Jonathan
of
Strange is
out of
out of
their
his depth.
depth.
Yeah.
Yes. And they kind of my magicians tend to have libraries and complicated theories, and it's all and complicated spells and ways of doing things, and it's all a way of really covering up the fact they don't really know what they're doing.
Right. Yeah.
I think, yeah, I I like there's I think there's a line in Jonathan Strange, Mr. Norrell, where a politician says magic is exactly like everything else, just full of problems and disappointments. And it's just and that was kind of what I wanted to say. But there's always a deeper magic behind it, whether it's fairy magic or the Raven King's magic, which holds out a hope of something else, but which isn't about power. I think that's the very interesting thing, and it's in Strange and Norrell, and it's in Piranesi, which is the difference between magic, which is trying to just force something to a human's will, and which in a way does make it no different from anything else from science. It's just trying to get reality to conform to what humans want, and a different sort of magic, which is more like a surrender, like a conversation with the world. That's the sort that interests me at the moment.
Excellent. How about you, Ellen?
Well, I mean, like with yeah, like I say, I've got the benefit of having real magicians with available biographies and then being able to fill in their personalities from my imagination. I really like writing Austin Osman Spare. I think with him, you've got somebody who, yes, he did embroider. He was a fantastic liar and came up with all sorts of stories embroidering his magical past and things that he'd done, or even his service in the First World War, where he was attending to, I think he was an ambulance worker in the First World War, but he told stories about being trapped under a mound of corpses, which never happened. But he was a fantasist, like so many of the characters in The Great When. But later people attributed all sorts of things to Spare, that he could conjure demons into plain sight, that he could have anything he want happen by writing sigils, that he could do all of these things, that he could make it rain. Um, the thing is that I don't think that that's necessary with someone like Spare. Just look at the man's paintings. Just look at his drawings, and all of the magic that you should ever need is right there. That the man was a magician in his art. And I would say that London has probably got enough ugly spirits and enough rain as it is. It probably doesn't need any more. Whereas it does need artists like Austin Osman Spare. So that's perhaps my approach, at least to the magicians in the Great Wen.
Brilliant. Well, I'm going to throw some audience questions your way now. First for Susanna from Hugh. Susanna, are you also a magician in real life?
No, no, no. I think it's hard enough being a writer, actually. You don't want that is the only magic that I have ever really been able to do. It's really the only magic I want to do, I think. Um, it's an odd thing. All you really want to do is have more ideas for more things to write and be able to write them. I think that's fine.
Well, here comes another one for you then, which is along the same lines, I guess. For Susanna, if we do indeed and hopefully get another novel set in the world of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, will they make an appearance?
Um, possibly, but they certainly won't be the focus. They, I think my readers remember them more fondly than I do, possibly, because we spent a long time together. No, I would like to see them again, but probably not for too long. They, yeah. They're like people. We're like people who work together for a very long time. We might get together for a drink or something, but that'll be about it, really.
Fair enough. Here's a question for both of you from John. Can you each talk a bit about your writing environment and your day-to-day work routine? I'd love to know that too. Alan, how does it come together for you? When
Um, well, my writing environment is it's pretty much the same as my environment. Um, this armchair, if I am thinking of stuff or making physical notes in a jotter, or there's my work desk over there in the corner with my device upon it. I've got a desktop computer. Which is not connected to the internet. I just use it as a glorified electronic typewriter.
Mhm.
And I've been a little bit more disciplined of late, but in that I tend to work quite late at night. on these long London books, because then the day's over. I'm not going to be getting any phone calls. There's a great sort of psychic silence. People are not only asleep, but they're not even thinking. You know, they're not making any noise physically or psychically, and I find that that's a great time to write. And if I can get my pitifully small, I try to get 500 words done a day, which sounds slow, but um, I do spend a lot of time. I don't spend much time at all revising. I try to get it all right first time, just because I worked in a serial medium. By the time you're on episode 3, episode 1's already in the shops. You haven't got any chance to go back and fix it, so you try to get it right. But so that's you can't really call it a routine or an environment really, but that's my routine and my environment.
Excellent. How about you, Susanna?
The complete opposite, I think. I tend to write early in the morning, because I think for the same reason, sort of reason that Alan writes at night, because there aren't people fussing, and it's just, your head is clear. My head is clear early in the morning, so that's my most productive time. And but as for how long I write, it's difficult to say. I've suffered with this illness for many, many years, and now I'm starting to feel quite a lot better, which is great, but I don't really know how long I write, because it used to be a struggle to do 3 hours a day, and now we'll see. I think I can do more, but we'll see. But I tend to write in the living room, and with a laptop on the sofa, with a laptop on my knee, and I have to have stuffed toys around me to give me. I have a fox and a pig
A pig.
who yes, a pig. They have to sit with me to give me kind of psychological strength. That's very important.
Excellent. That's a lovely image. Susanna with her stuffed toys. Here's a interesting and tricky question, I think. Priscilla asks, is there a wrong way to read your books, meaning readers attributing a different meaning than you meant, or came up with an interpretation that never came to mind to you? Is that something that bothers you guys, or are they sort of off when they're off and you don't really mind?
Well, for my part, I mean, I remember somebody, it might have been T.S. Eliot or somebody. I've probably got that wildly wrong, but somebody who said the book that you read may be much better than the book that I wrote. You have to allow for that. And I remember that when I was doing Lost Girls with my wife Melinda Gebby, we got this final page where we pull back from this erotic hotel to the fields of the First World War, and there's this horribly mutilated soldier, and there's a poppy growing in the foreground. That was the last panel, and that episode was called, at least one part of it was "Who Dreamed It," which was the last chapter of Alice in Wonderland, or Alice Through the Looking Glass.
Mm.
It was called "Who Dreamed It." So, and we had some readers writing in and saying, I think that what they're saying is, this soldier in the last panel, that the whole of the preceding erotic story has just been a vision passing through his mind at the moment of death. And if that was true, then who are we to say that it is obscene? And I thought, I really wish I'd thought of that. But sort of, it's permissible. That could be. That is a perfectly reasonable reading of it. As long as it's a reading that you enjoy, it is perfectly permissible.
Brilliant answer. What would you say, to that?
I would say something very similar, I think. People, people, all readers to some extent have to imagine the worlds and the characters in different ways, shaped by what they know and their own experiences. Yeah, I mean, I think people, particularly with Piranesi, some people have come up with quite wonderful interpretations. Some of them, I think, no, I wouldn't quite say that, but I mean, perhaps that may be the interpretation that they need at that moment. Somebody interpreted it to that I had really understood Plato, which I don't think is true, but they were quite certain that this proved that I had, which was lovely. But so yeah, no, I think it passes from you to the reader. So yeah.
Own kind of magic, I guess. This
Mm.
is a brilliant question that kind of follows on well from this as well, from Jason. So Jason says, post-Tolkien fantasy often tries to be as complete or totalizing as possible with lots of maps and glossaries. Can you guys discuss the value of mystery or uncertainty in fantasy compared to these kind of totally explained fantasy worlds?
Well, I found, I remember when I was about 13 or 14, we were asked to, by a quite enlightened English teacher, to have a try at writing a novel. Um, I had just been absorbing Tolkien and loads of other things in that kind of fantasy area. And so I immediately started with uh, all of the maps of the kingdoms, including with sort of continental drift to show how they had changed shape over the millennia. I'd got the dynasties of all of the rulers of these kingdoms, the names of all of them. I'd got all of that stuff, you know. It was a pretty rubbish novel. I think I got 3 chapters done because I was most concerned about all of the maps and the glossaries. Um, I've had people come up to me to say that they've got a brilliant novel, and how do they get it published? And they'll show me, yes, it's all about the kingdom of Atlantis, and I've got all of the kings in their order of descent, and yeah, it's all right as a sort of a little auxiliary to the main story, maybe. I mean, but with the Great Wen, I quite like the fact that the fantasy kingdom that we give a map of is London, and I'd thought that like
Yeah.
having having the Elvish vocabulary or something in the back of the book, we could put Cockney rhyming slang, and
Beautiful map. Beautiful
but
map.
that's what I'd probably. Oh yes, it's a lovely map.
Is
It's
it?
a wonderful map. It's sort of, but yeah, I thought that was quite cute to have. Yeah, this is my fantasy kingdom. It includes Charing Cross Road and Shoreditch and everywhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Susanna?
I love, I mean, I do love Tolkien, and I love the completeness. I love the feeling, the depth of it. I just don't have that sort of imagination, or indeed his scholarship to build that kind of thing. Things grow organically with me. I write something, and then something else grows out of that, and something else, it's very much my process is very much, as I say, like the medieval painting. You sketch in this misty landscape behind, and then maybe a bit later you'll go on and explore some of the misty landscape in another story. But you've still then got to you've got to suggest further depths. Which way am I going? Further depths going on and on.
Mm.
Things that are unexplored, I think. Yeah, so for me, it's quite important that it isn't all explained.
Mm. So the depth is important, but people get to it in different ways, I guess.
Yeah.
Hmm. Sarah asks, do you have any practical advice for young writers?
I think
Find another
but
field now. Seriously, find something else to do. Find something that will actually earn you some money. Stock supermarket shelves. No, that's cynical. But carry on, Susanna, please.
I was just going to say I think most of my writing life I have been getting back to paring away the things that I thought I ought to have been writing about and getting back to what really interests me. So um, find what you really love and write about that. And I think that's the best advice. And write about it in the way that appeals to you. Don't worry if people tell you, no, this isn't what's selling or anything. I mean, that's it'll have truth, it'll have meaning if you write about what is really important to you, even if it's fairies.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, the thing is that when people, obviously, you have to have a way to sustain yourself. But when people ask, how do I become a writer? Um, the thing is, the answer is write. Just write every day. Write because you love it. Um, and try to get better, but only for yourself. Um, you cannot rely upon um, the audience and what they think of it. You can't write for, oh, this will be popular with this part of the audience because that never works. Uh,
Mm.
and also, this sort of book is selling right now. I should write one like that. No. The books that sell are generally the ones that have got an original voice. And the only way to find your original voice is to practice speaking in it. And to carry on. And also that even if in this world is treacherous for people who are seeking to pursue a creative career, uh, back when I was starting out, there was at least a rickety scaffolding that you could climb to the career through. I mean, things like local newspapers, fanzines, things like that that don't exist anymore. But these were I was able to, to get to a viable writing career through those places. The thing is, it's the writing that's the most important thing. In the bad times of your life, and you will probably have a few, then writing to have another world that you can step into is an enormous benefit and relief. Um, there and writing will make you a bigger person. I mean, when you were asking Susanna about magic earlier, and Susanna was saying that she didn't class herself as a magician. I believe that all art, all writing, all creativity is magic. Straightforward, purely and simply. They are just being treated in slightly different ways. And I believe that it's all a magic, it's all a rabbit out of a hat, isn't it? It's all something from nothing. It's all an idea out of an empty mind. And that will do wonders for you to extend your writing career. It's not a career. To extend your writing, that will make you a bigger person inside with more space in your head, space extensions that you've built onto your head and onto your personality. Um, don't worry about selling it because that will probably break your heart. If it happens, it happens, and that'll be great. But the main thing is the relationship between you and your writing. And nobody, no external circumstances can take that away from you.
And that's such a wonderfully inspiring thing to say, I think. And I can see everyone in the comments is saying thank you. After your cynical first answer, you thought it out the back there. Um, we're like it's like 1 minute over time. I wanted to ask you guys if you can carry on for like a few more minutes. just, and it kind of speaks to what you were just saying, Alan. Why is it important to read fantasy? What can fantasy bring to our lives today? If you could do me quickish answers on that, I'd be super grateful. Susanna, could you tell us about the importance of fantasy literature?
I think fantasy, for a long time, literary fiction addressed resolutely the human, but did not look beyond the human. And I think fantasy literature sort of looks to what is beyond the human, whether it's animals, as in the wood at midwinter, or nature, or something spiritual, or something Jungian, the subconscious, the archetypes. It could be anything, but it sort of it makes our world a bit bigger, I think, and it allows, as Alan says, for a bit more possibility, both in the world and in us as well.
Making our world bigger. I love that. Alan, what would you say?
I'd say pretty much the same thing. I believe that the material world that exists around us, as I was saying earlier, I think that this is entirely founded upon the world of the fantastical and the imaginary. So you could see it as in writing fantasy, we are doing a we're exploring that realm and we're trying to include it in reality. Jules Verne writing about submarines and, about getting to the moon by getting everybody into a big artillery shell and just firing it at the moon, which at least sounded scientific at the time. Sort of, this is how we expand our reality because we are building our reality out into areas where it was previously just fantasy and speculation. So, yes, it's a way of expanding what is real.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to go and read and maybe even try and write right now. I'm completely inspired. What a wonderful hour of listening to you guys. Thank you so much. I could have carried on for ages, but we've come to the end of your time. So thank you. And thanks to all of you for listening as well. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you,
Take
everyone.
care.
Bye.
Bye bye.